Hello, everybody, and good day to you. Welcome to your Ruby Live event and my office hours. My name is Eric Wynkoop, and I'm the Director of Culinary Instruction at Ruby, and I'm also one of your chef instructors in the courses. And today, again, is my office hours, and this is your opportunity to ask any question that you want as it concerns food and cooking, and I'll do my best to respond to them. All right. I've got just a couple of very brief items to touch upon before we start in on the list of questions that have already been populated on the right-hand side of your screen. And the first item of housekeeping is that if you'd like to participate, please take a look at the dialog box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and feel free to type in a question or a comment, and they'll make their way to the queue. And the second item that I want to touch upon is that if there's a question in the current list on the right-hand side of your page that you would like me to address sooner than later, then you can click on the heart-shaped icon in the upper right-hand corner of the individual question, and that'll push it up in priority. But as always, I will respond to all of the questions that are posted. So stick around. All right. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start in on today's questions. And let's see, the first one from Robert. And this one has two hearts, 2 clicks on the heart. So it's popped up to the top here. Hello, Robert. Regarding daily care and sharpening, quality knife. Before this course, I purchased a handheld sharpener by Wüsthof. And it looks like it's from the same family of products as your knives. It has a fine or coarse slot. So it's one of the 2-slot Wüsthof handheld sharpeners versus their 4-slot, for example. Better to use the fine several times a week or invest in a steel? Okay, so good question here. Let me preface my response by first saying that while I'm familiar with a number of different handheld sharpeners, I haven't specifically used the Wüsthof brand, although the others that I've used are probably very similar. Also, I have not used one of these handheld sharpeners long term. I've used them, I don't own one, so if I'm out catering or on a job somewhere and I need something in a hurry and there happens to be one of those, then I'll grab it and I'll use it. And so they're kind of a la carte applications, okay, for me. Now, within that context, let me talk through this, and we'll come up with some sort of a scenario that you can probably choose from more confidently. The first is that, as a sharpener goes, they tend to take off more metal from the blade. They shave off more metal than a steel would, okay? And, in terms of the fine option or the fine setting on this particular sharpener, I don't know just how fine it is, but you might give it a try and, see if applying your knife to that, say, once a week gets you satisfactory performance, okay? I will also say that still, though, it's not going to be the same as a steel, right? The idea with a steel is that, with regular use, meaning just daily use of your knife, that cutting edge of your blade, if we're looking at the blade like this, tends to roll over. And that's what makes the knife feel dull. And so it's the steel that aligns that very simply without the objective of removing much metal, okay? And in aligning that cutting edge, the knife feels sharp again, okay? And now there are different types of steels, and some will take off a little bit of metal. Maybe most of them do, and we can confirm that by wiping the edge of the knife after we steel the knife, which is always recommended. And then also, if you wipe off the steel itself and you look at your towel, you'll often see a little bit of gray residue, which is the metal removed from the knife. Okay, but that quantity is probably less than what you're going to take off with the sharpener. All right. My personal preference, I would say, would be to use a steel on a daily basis. Once a day is probably fine, for most home cooks. In restaurants or in other high volume settings, we might use a steel multiple times a day. Okay, so I hope that helps you make a choice around how to move forward in your frequent knife maintenance. Thank you. All right, and the next question. I'm looking for tips on using my air fryer to cook tofu oil-free without it drying out completely. Also, if recipe calls for tahini, but you dislike that flavor, what nut butter would you use instead, or would you just leave it out? Okay, we have a two-part question here. Let's take a look at the first part. And so tofu, oil-free in an air fryer. Yeah, this is one where we need to take some steps to protect the outside of the tofu. Tofu is really high in water content, and depending on just what sort of an effect that you want. If you happen to leave it in the air fryer for a while, the water is going to evaporate. It's going to become tough. It's going to become chewy. It'll shrink down in size. It just may not be aesthetically pleasing in so many respects. So, one consideration is to try dredging the tofu. What I'm envisioning here are some diced tofu. Dredge it in some sort of flour. And, without any oil, the result is going to probably look dry and perhaps a little bit powdery. But if we're dredging lightly, right, that's may not be offensive to you. Again, that's going to be a personal call on your part. But what that is going to do is protect, create a barrier on the exterior of the tofu and protect it from the heat. It's going to slow down that evaporation process. Okay. Another approach would be to add a different type of a coating. It could be an herb or a seed coating, a dredging of some sort. And again, I understand this changes the nature of the tofu, but there's a compromise that needs to be struck here if we want to protect the tofu from the heat. All right, so give that a try. Protect the outside with some sort of a coating, whether it's dredging in flour or maybe ground nuts, a nut meal of some sort, and see how you like the results. Okay, and then the second part of the question is regarding a substitute for tahini, and this is 100% a personal call on your part. I happen to love tahini, so I might say, why make a substitute? But if you don't like tahini, then give anything else a try. It could be cashew butter, it could be almond butter. Maybe you make your own, sunflower seed butter. But play around, experiment, and see what suits your palate. All right, thank you. All right, and next question. I'm loving all the things I've learned in the Ruby course. Excellent. I have a question about quinoa. Can I freeze cooked quinoa? If so, how long will it last, and how do I defrost it? The answer is a resounding yes. Feel free to freeze cooked quinoa. And that's going to be true of all grains and legumes and most foods, as a matter of fact, are going to freeze pretty darn well. And, how long will it last? So things in the freezer can last a very long time. And I think I've, certainly in my restaurant days, have forgotten things in the freezer and have discovered them a couple of years later. To find that they could have been viable had I chosen to use them at that point, save for some freezer burn around the edges. So, with that in mind, please, remember that as we put something in the freezer, it preserves the food item on one hand, but there is a decline in quality that takes place basically throughout the period of time that food item is in the freezer. Okay, so how long will it last? I don't know. I don't think that if folks very often do a maximum shelf life test on foods. Some of that is going to be up to you, right, as a consumer, and what you judge to be edible after 12 months or 6 months or 3 months, for example. As a general guideline, think of, say, 6 months as a maximum in the freezer, and then try to get to items much sooner than that, maybe after a month or 2 or 3. And to help that process, I always recommend labeling your foods with the name of the item as well as the date. And, I have even somewhat recently put things in the freezer without labeling them, thinking that, for sure, I'm going to remember, that I spent all day making this thing. How could I forget what it is? Only to find that 6 or 7 weeks later, I really can't identify that brown stuff in the container because it looks like all the other brown things in the other containers. So do label, okay, to make your life easier. And then how do you defrost it? The recommendation, generally speaking, when defrosting any food is to do it in the refrigerator for as long as it needs to defrost. So smaller quantities might defrost in the course of a few hours, whereas larger quantities might need an overnight defrost or maybe 2 or 3 days. Again, just depending on how large that package is, of food that needs to be defrosted. Okay, so plan accordingly. All right, thank you very much. Okay, next up, when using chia and flaxseed for egg replacers, what are the major differences between the two? Is chia seed a stronger binder than flax? Flax is a pretty robust binder, and I'd have to look that up to refresh my memory, I guess. But in terms of differences between the two, I use them interchangeably in the limited applications that I use them in. Pancakes on Sunday morning, for example, and I don't see much difference in the results. Not that I can tell. Certainly not any differences that jump out to me. And in these instances, I always recommend that the student experiment, make identical batches of whatever it is that you're preparing, use chia seeds in one, use flax seeds in the other, and then pay very close attention to it and look for aroma. If flax seeds had more aroma than chia seeds, for example, look for the strength of the setting power of each of those, and look at color and move forward from there. You might find that you want to use one in a particular application and the other item in a different application. Okay, but that's going to be the best way for you to find out what suits your palate and your aesthetic sensibilities. All right, thank you. All right, next up from Carol Ann. Thank you, Carol Ann. Appreciate your engagement and participation here as well as with Ruby. What difference does it make to the outcome of a recipe when choosing between mincing garlic with a chef's knife or using a garlic press? Well, let me just briefly explain the fundamental differences between those two scenarios. It's really one of surface area, okay, where if you're crushing an item, then you'll be creating more surface area than if you're dicing or slicing or mincing an item. So with more surface area, there's more opportunity for more flavor exchange and quicker flavor exchange. Okay. Another difference that I recognize from this question is the look of the food to some extent. A mince, we can tell that there's a minced product or minced garlic in a preparation by looking at it, because those small cuts are probably going to be visible. Again, it depends on how long it's been cooked and what other items are together with the garlic, but you might be able to see it more readily than the crushed garlic. Now, in terms of whether one would notice the quicker infusion of flavor and aroma from crushed garlic, it depends on the cooking time and the time allowed for the garlic to mellow out during that cooking process. So a shorter cooking period might result in a crushed garlic that's a little bit more noticeable than minced garlic. I would probably expect that most diners may not notice the difference. However, as a cook, you're in control. And, you're, of course, aware of how you've handled the food. So, again, you might conduct a bit of an experiment. Make your fried rice or your soup or whatever that preparation is, split it into 2 batches, add garlic in 2 different states, right? One minced, one crushed, and, finish the cooking process at the same duration, and then compare and see what you pick up as the difference. Okay. I mean, after all, if you're cooking for primarily at home, right, for your family, then it's that audience, right, that's going to be most important. And so you might solicit some feedback and have a conversation at the table, around those different preparation approaches. If you're cooking professionally or otherwise cooking for the public, then you might be a little bit more discerning in terms of the decision that you make, and move forth with the path that you think would be most appealing to that audience. All right, from whom you cannot always receive feedback, or at least it's not perhaps as objective as it might be from your family members. Okay, thank you very much. All right, next question from Cherie. I still get really anxious and overwhelmed when cooking. Any advice on how to overcome this and make things run more smoothly? Thank you very much for introducing this topic. And, as we can see, it's garnered 5 clicks on the heart icon. And, I also recognize during my years, in the kitchen teaching, as well as online in more recent years, that there is a lot of anxiety in kitchens, especially in, I'll say, U.S. kitchens when it comes to cooking. And so, how do we sort of minimize anxiety around cooking? I would say, first of all, what comes to mind for me is to practice the fundamentals. Build your skill set and read, and thereby establishing a broader knowledge base on how to handle foods. Okay, and then also in alignment with wherever your skill set is at that time, design a meal plan or proceed with a meal preparation accordingly, so you don't get in over your head, so to speak. And of course, that's overwhelming, I think, for anybody, and no matter what your level of experience is. Another thing that comes to mind is, our expectation around outcomes. Okay, and this is going to be true as a student, as we submit Ruby assignments, as well as cooking for guests at home or our family on a daily basis. And that is, understand that we're always learning. We're constantly learning. I mean, if you've made a given dish 50 times or 100 times, then I'll hand it to you. You've got some experience around that. And there's probably going to be a lot less anxiety. But when we're making something for this first time or the third or fourth time, we have a lot to learn yet. And so please be forgiving of yourself and be forgiving of the process. Understand that, until you get a lot of experience under your belt, that your results may be inconsistent. And if you are, shooting for a certain outcome, you have a certain image or expectation, that it's simply a matter of effort to get you there. Okay, practice makes better is what I like to say. Okay, perfection, I'll leave that up to you as to how you define perfection. But I think of practice as making my skill set better and my understanding of the situation better. And that certainly reduces my anxiety. Now, the other thing I'll mention is, and this might sound off base, but it's definitely part of, can be connected to our kitchen activity, and that is meditation and mindfulness. Okay, meditation really grounds us and can bring a sense of calm that carries into all of our other activities during a day or the day. And so I strongly recommend to everybody that they take up a practice of meditation. I mean, even if it's 5 minutes a day, right? It doesn't have to be 60 minutes or a couple of hours, but just 5 minutes a day can bring a sense of calm that stays with us. It's really amazing. So please consider those things and see how it changes your anxiety level. Thank you. Let's see. Okay, I got a quick note from Fran, our instructor and pastry chef in the Essential Vegan Desserts course here at Ruby. And in response to the previous question on chia and flax seeds, and Fran says they both work equally well. So move forth with either one of those. Again, if you want to compare them, please feel free to do that. And thank you, Fran, for your input. I appreciate it. All right, from Marina. Hello. Can any recipe be scaled proportionally, either up or down? What should one be mindful about? So the mindfulness enters again here. Excellent. So let's talk about this. Okay. When we scale, right, or adjust recipes, make them smaller in yield or larger in yield, if we are making a relatively small adjustment, right, such as changing a recipe from 6-portion yield to a 3-portion yield, or maybe the other direction, 2 portions to 4 portions, for example, those are pretty small adjustments. And generally speaking, you can divide by 2 or multiply by 2, and you're going to be fine. Okay. Certainly, as we're making larger adjustments, maybe we're moving up to feed 20 people, right, or 50 people, right, for a holiday meal or for a catering event, or perhaps we're scaling a recipe that feeds 12 down to just 1, right, because I live by myself. In those cases, the main ingredient or ingredients, right, whether it's a grain or a legume and some supporting vegetables, let's say, those can be scaled up or scaled down without problem. It's the seasonings and the flavor, the concentrated flavorings that we might use in the form of spices, for example, salt, for example, that we need to be careful of. Because, for example, when we scale a recipe up in yield, if it's a large jump, we let's say it's a 15x jump in size. we do not multiply spices by 15x and simply add those to the recipe, because probably it will be too strong. And so there's going to be some adjustment in tasting process that's required on your part, the cook. Okay. And in order to find a balance that's going to be suitable for your desired outcome. Now, in those instances, I always recommend taking notes so that, you can make adjustments again, right, the next time you make it, and finally fine tune it to where you like it based upon the specific ingredients and the places of origin of those ingredients and the brand name, that you happen to buy of that ingredient, so that all of those flavor concentrations are going to be consistent from that point forward. Okay, so again, just to summarize, if it's a small change, then we can typically just multiply or divide all ingredients, and the results will be pretty good. Or should be good. But if you're making a big jump in quantity or a big change up or down, then we need to do some tasting along the way of those very concentrated ingredients, specifically spices and salt. All right, thank you. All right, next up, what adjustments should be made to oven temperature when cooking in convection mode? So the general guideline is, if you are starting off with a recipe that's written for a conventional oven, which has no fan or the fan setting is off, okay, and you are then using equipment that has a fan, so a convection oven, then we decrease the oven. Let me see. We would decrease the oven temperature by 20 to 25 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 10 to 15 degrees Celsius. Okay, and as with most any adjustment, I say that's a starting point. Okay, because your equipment is going to be unique, and even if you have the same brand of oven as I have, it may be calibrated just a little bit different. Or if you use it more than me, then the calibration, might be, a little bit more out of adjustment than my oven, or vice versa, right? So, pay attention to the results and be prepared to make further adjustments that coincide specifically, right, with your kitchen, your equipment, your food, your quantities, your desired outcomes. Okay, and as always, take notes. Thank you. All right, next up, kindly share your secrets for week of meal planning. Imagine stressed out working mom, plant-based. Okay, let me share a couple of thoughts here. Now, so in terms of meal planning, at the basis of this is what we call batch cooking. So if you are affiliated with, and I'm speaking to our general audience here, if you're affiliated with one of our longer programs, Forks Over Knives, for example, or the Plant-Based Pro course, then batch cooking, that concept of batch cooking is emphasized, right? It's one where we will make items in bulk so that we can quickly compose a meal. And if you've got 5 or 10 different items in bulk, then you can compose many, right, different combinations of those ingredients to create many different meals. And so therein lies the efficiency, right, of that approach. Now, when I say 10 items, I'm not talking about preparing 5 different legumes and 5 different vegetables. I'm talking about having a couple of sauces, maybe a couple of other items that might serve as a dressing for salads, and it might include 1 or 2 grains. It might include 1 legume. It might include 1 or 2 vegetables. and depending on how you want to approach, right, the finished product. And so to provide some more concrete examples here, what I have in the kitchen, probably on most any day of the week, is a large jar of tahini, which serves as a base for a dressing. I've got citrus fruit, lemons, limes, and it's certainly those two, and sometimes oranges as well. And I'll utilize both of the zest, where the oils and the aroma and flavor is concentrated, as well as the juice. And so I'm getting sourness and sweetness. So those are the tastes that will go into a salad, for example. There may certainly be times when I use the meat of an orange, for example, the segments of that fruit. But I always try to use the zest, because there is so much value in that aromatic and therefore flavorful oil. Okay, and so these are all these bulk items that I'm thinking about. Okay, let's see what else is on hand here. I've got in order to switch up flavors, I've got miso paste, which can go into a dressing. I've got sriracha sauce, which can go into a dressing if I want a bit of heat, right? Miso provides sweetness, it provides saltiness, it provides other umami qualities, and they're all a little bit different, so keep that in mind. And again, I'm trying to envision what else I have right now going. I might have soaking black-eyed peas. I picked up a 25-pound bag of black-eyed peas some time ago. And so I'll have a bowl of those soaking, or I might have garbanzo beans. I've got black garbanzos as well as what I'll say as regular garbanzos. And then, I might pick up other beans as well. We've gone through some adzuki beans recently, and some cannellinis, for example. I've got bins of rye berries and wheat berries. We've got brown rice. We've got quinoa in a couple of different colors. Other legumes will come in and out of our inventory as well. And so I will often have a grain and a legume soaking. I'm in no hurry to use those. Okay. If you soak them, you can keep them soaking for 2, 3, 4, 5 days if you need to. Okay. I recommend changing the water each day just to keep it fresh. I mean, otherwise the bacteria kind of goes wild, and you get foaming and some darkening of the water and some aromas that naturally, right, come out from a setting like that. But if we keep that fresh by changing the water, then we prolong the shelf life of that soaking grain or legume, and then just use it at your convenience. Okay, so that's another example of a bulk item that I would have on hand. In terms of cooked vegetable items, I will roast off sweet potatoes, maybe once or twice a week. And sweet potatoes come in different varieties in our house. In other words, we like sweet potatoes. And so we've got red ones and purple ones and white ones and creamy ones. And so those will be roasted in the oven. And then they'll usually hang around for a couple, 3 days, maybe 4 days, again, depending on how potato crazy I go when I roast them off. And sometimes those are eaten as a snack. Sometimes they're simply a side item at the table in their whole form. Sometimes they'll be incorporated into a soup or a stew or a stir fry at the very end of the process, right before service, because they're already cooked. And so just adding them at the end to warm up is going to be adequate. When it comes to other vegetables, I usually don't cook those in advance. But that's just my personal preference. Things like carrots or beets, maybe beets I do once in a while, but other things can certainly be cooked in advance in the spirit of batch cooking. And I know a lot of people that do, for example. But I don't, only because it's very quick and easy for me to pull out a cutting board and the chef's knife and to break down the quantity of product that I need, and then I move forward with cooking. Okay. Keep in mind also that, if you cook off a batch of brown rice or rye berries, for example, or quinoa, or you have a combination of 2 or 3 of those things, that those leftovers, right, can then be used either by themselves or in combination to make fried rice, right, or some variation of that theme. And that also, right, is part of the batch cooking formula, right, or the batch cooking approach to meal preparation. Okay, so if you've got some quinoa, you've got some brown rice, you combine those for a beautiful base of fried rice. You can flavor that in any direction that you wish, right, to sort of look like your favorite regional cuisine, whether it's Mexican or Thai or Japanese or Korean or something else. And so again, the idea here is to use these base ingredients, switch up the combination, switch up the flavoring ingredients or the aromatics, the sauces that you use, to create perhaps a similar dish, but really one that is different, in the result. And this is the way that you bring meals together pretty quickly, as a working person. Okay, and so give that a try. It takes practice, right? And it's going to take some practice to find combinations that everyone will enjoy, textures that everyone will enjoy, for example. All right, but do give it a try. Thank you. All right, next up from Cindy. Number 1, please tell me the proper way to make a balsamic glaze. All right, let's start with this one. All right, a balsamic glaze, also known as a balsamic reduction, right, is made by very simply reducing balsamic vinegar, all right, over heat. Okay, and that's really as simple as it gets. Now, the quality of the balsamic vinegar makes some difference. Now, if we're using the best balsamicos, right? So if it's a traditional balsamic, then there's, we're not going to reduce it. We just use it straight out of the bottle. We enjoy it. At the very sort of opposite end of the spectrum are products that are really vinegars that have sugars and caramel coloring added to them, and they're very, very thin in their body. And when we reduce some of those products, they really take a long time to get thick, or sometimes they don't really thicken up. So if we find a middle of the range product and that has a little more substance to it, and we reduce that, then it will thicken up. And we're going to simmer or otherwise use a relatively gentle heat. And then, typically if we reduce by about 50% in volume, then we get to a point where it will coat the back of the spoon. So you would dip your spoon in and just kind of look at the backside as it runs off. And it should nappe, right, or coat the back of the spoon. Drag your finger through it and feel it, look at it, taste it, get that sensation on the palate to see if that reduction or that glaze is going to do what you want it to do, depending on the application. Okay, now you can reduce it more or less, right, depending on the desired effect. And also be sure to taste it, because some of these balsamic vinegars can maintain some sourness, right? Some acidity that you may want to balance with some added sweetener. And it can be anything. As an example, you might choose some brown sugar, but the sweetener is going to be up to you at that point. Okay. Do take caution to use gentle fire, because especially as you reduce the balsamic vinegar, and this is true of other liquids as well, like stock, as those particles in suspension concentrate, they also burn easier. And this is going to be true of the sugars present in balsamic vinegar. And so as you move to a smaller volume, you might consider transferring that quantity to a smaller pot as well. Okay, but always work with a gentle heat, and don't forget about it. Stay close by, give it a stir on occasion in case things stick to the bottom of the pan, which would result in scorching or burning. Okay, so a pretty simple process otherwise. Now, part two of Cindy's questions here. I wanted to say thanks to you and Chef Ken for giving me the confidence to start using dried mushrooms. I made veg stock with them to make vegan kimchi and then jjigae. Wonderful. Again, thank you very much for joining us during our office hours and for being here at Ruby. And so good to know that you're benefiting from these discussions and, as well as the course content. And wow, kimchi and a nice jjigae sounds wonderful, especially on these cool autumn and winter days. Thanks so much. All right, next up. Hello, Madalena. Is there a secret or general rule to apply in making vegan burgers with a nice texture that don't crumble or result, being too soft? I find it difficult. Aha. This is a perennial question asked by our students. And let me, first of all, touch upon a meat-based patty, right, or burger. As we blend ground meat, we talk about binders. And it is the strong proteins in animal meat that act as what we call a primary binder. And we just don't get that strength when we work with plant-based burgers. So there's some compromise is going to be necessary. And it just depends also on what you want to add or what you don't want to add to your food. Okay. In my experience, when I make plant-based burgers or patties, they're always a little bit soft, certainly in comparison to a meat patty. And that is the compromise that I'm willing to make as I enjoy a plant-based patty. Okay. Otherwise, the practice, right, your repetition or practice, should focus on finding a balance with, let's say, some of the grains, right, or legumes and or potatoes that you use as the binder. All right. Now, fully cooked russet potatoes or a floury potato or a mealy potato makes a very nice base to a plant-based patty. But it is soft. Okay. Now, to that, we can add some coarsely crumbled legumes. Unless you're going to get some binding power from that as well. And then also some grains. And it's nice to sort of overcook the grains so they become a little bit sticky, or you can pick and choose, right? So for example, oats are very sticky in their texture once they're cooked up. And I like to use whole oat grains or the whole oat groat. And again, cook them with plenty of water so that they retain their shape, so they provide some nice texture when you're chewing, yet they just the nature of oats is to be a little bit sticky and binding. And so we can combine a couple or more of those ingredients to find a balance in the overall texture that we like. Okay. Now, crumbliness is fundamentally due to low moisture content. And so I suggest that as I mentioned, we cook grains with lots of water so that they're very soft and retain moisture as you form the patty and then heat it up in the oven, for example, or on the stovetop in a pan, either way. Now, if it's too soft, again, that reflects moisture content, and it's a matter of simply drying out those ingredients or cooking the components with a little bit less water. Okay, and so here, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, taking notes is what I recommend as you cook, and I'm always taking notes, and so I always recommend that to my students as well. Okay, but do try a lot of experimenting and find combinations of ingredients as well as moisture content that will get to a point that is satisfying for you, all the while keeping in mind that some compromise is necessary. Okay, because a vegetable-based burger, if it's going to be clean, is going to be softer than its animal-based counterpart. All right, thank you. All right, so Marina says, for a vegan burger question, crumbled soy curls have solved that for me. Much better texture, no crumbling or dry. Okay, excellent. So we have an ingredient you can use, the crumbled soy curls. And so do take a look at that type of a product. And these are similar products are going to be these plant-based protein derivatives that when they're rehydrated, they can look a little bit like ground meat in texture. And so that's a great suggestion, Marina. Thank you very much. All right, next up from Linda. Hello. I'm new to the whole food plant-based diet and cooking. I'm not very creative or skilled at it, but I am learning. Preparing a meal seems to take a long time. Do you have any tips for making quick and easy meals? The first thing I'm going to say is practice, right? It's repetition, and it's also the development of your foundational skill set that's going to get you there. Many, many years ago, when I was new to the kitchen, it took me all day to make a single meal. And the kitchen was a mess, and cleanup took all night. I still have some memories of those days. But I've built up my speed and my knowledge, and through repetition, and such that a meal comes together for me sometimes in 30 minutes. That's probably a pretty quick meal, but it's a hot meal. It's more than one component. And it takes a lot of focus and engagement to get that done in 30 minutes. Oftentimes it's an hour, however, on a weekday. So the first thing is just to be patient with yourself. And, as you're taking this path, right, toward the whole food way of life, you might, introduce just one or two dishes at a time, while you still might use some convenience foods. That's okay, and in an attempt to get food on the table within a reasonable amount of time, and all the while you're building your skills, your knife skills, and other skills that are at the foundation of what we're doing here. And, also take in consideration the batch cooking approach that I discussed several minutes ago. And, I think that will help shorten the food to table time for all of us. I mean, I use that approach myself on a daily basis to some extent or another. Okay. So go forth and conquer. All right. And if you have specific questions around food handling, give me a shout, okay, at support@ruby.com, and I'd be happy to answer your questions. Thank you. Okay, so next up from Tom, techniques or additives to repair a sauce when it breaks. Yeah, this really depends, I think, on the specific circumstances and the sauce that is in question. For example, fixing a hollandaise might be very different than making adjustments to, some sort of a pan sauce, for example. But do keep in mind a couple of things that will add stability to many sauces. One is fat. Okay, so it again depends on the type of cooking, the category of cooking. Excuse me just a second. If it's the animal realm of cooking and sauces, then something like heavy cream, that the fat that's present can add stability to that sauce. Another approach is to use a flour, a starch thickener of some sort. Okay, that adds a lot of stability to a sauce, whether it's plant-based or animal-based. And so, as a starting point, I would say keep those in mind, right, as ingredients, right, that you might incorporate at the beginning, at the midpoint, or at the end of a sauce, depending on what it is that you're preparing. Okay, and then other things to keep in mind are extreme temperatures. We want to avoid those. So freezing, right, can break a sauce. Sometimes it's just refrigeration that can result in a broken sauce when we go to reheat it. Extremely high temperatures can also be very damaging or harsh on the ingredients and cause separation where there was otherwise commingling, resulting in a broken sauce. Okay, so try to stay with more gentle temperatures, in the simmering range, for example. All right, thank you. All right, next up, what's the best way to calculate the nutritional value of recipes? I have Forks Over Knives cookbook, and they are not shown. Being diabetic, it is very valuable to me to know. The thing that comes to mind for me is to utilize one of the online resources, and I believe there are many of them. And these will take some time for you to either find recipes that you will use as is, right, or to find recipes that represent pretty closely what it is that you're preparing, or in some cases, these resources allow you to custom build your recipe by inputting ingredients and quantities that you will be using, and then it will generate some sort of a nutritional profile. And how accurate those are is really going to be up to the calculator. So you'll need to do some further digging to see if you will be satisfied with those results. Okay, because it's certainly different from going into a lab and determining specifically ingredient by ingredient what sort of nutritional values it represents. That, of course, is not feasible for most people, and certainly not on a meal-by-meal basis. So some compromise probably is going to be at hand, but also try to find the online resource or the calculator that you feel is most accurate for your needs. Okay, thank you. All right, next up, I'm making some polenta crostini to top with sauteed garlic mushrooms. What is your recommendation for topping seasoning for the polenta before or after baking? Well, your garlic mushrooms themselves sound pretty awesome. You might try some fresh herbs, whether it's basil or thyme or marjoram or a bit of rosemary to go along with the garlic mushrooms. There's I guess always complimentary olive oil or even a toasted sesame oil if you don't mind some added oil. I blend ingredients from a lot of different cuisines around the world. And so in an instance like this, I'm reaching for an Indian pickle, of which we usually have 3, 4, or 5 at any given time in the refrigerator. And, that brings a very, intense flavor, and so which satisfies me. But so those are a few ideas that you might consider. Thank you. All right, next up. Loved learning the mercury ball technique with stainless steel pans. I learned to get the pan a lot hotter than I thought I should. What about when using a non-stick or copper? Should I aim to get pans super hot? My personal approach around non-stick pans of any sort is not to heat them super duper high. At least I try not to. Now, when it comes to copper conducts heat really well. And so we are usually using the fire on a lower heat setting. So do keep that in mind. Now, the copper is going to get hot. It depends on what kind of copper cookware you're using. For example, if it's tin lined, like I have some old tin lined copper pots, you don't heat those up too hot because you can actually start to soften the tin in some cases. But many of the more modern copper pans are bonded to stainless steel, right? In which case just moderate the heat. Then you've got the ease of stainless steel, right, as a cooking surface. But do experiment with it. All of these changes from a given example require some experimentation on your part, okay? And not only is it the material of the pan or the coating in the pan, it's also your stovetop, right? How many BTUs does it put out? In other words, how much heat does your burner put out? So when I say medium heat setting, it really depends on your equipment. It's probably a little bit different than mine. You might need less heat or more heat. So be prepared to experiment and always take notes. All right, thank you. All right, next up, hello, Christine. I just wondered if you have any books you recommend on plant-based nutrition and also your favorite books on cooking. I don't have any books on plant-based nutrition that I'm aware of, and probably only because I don't worry about it. My approach is that, and this is going to be, I think, true for most people most of the time. Now, certainly if you have a specific situation or condition that you're addressing, then you know that, and you need to take special consideration here. But from what I've learned, if we eat a varied diet in moderation, then we're going to get the nutrients that we need, including protein, which is often questioned by people out there. So as a result, I follow that very simple guideline, and I don't have concerns. I rarely catch cold, for example, and otherwise don't get sick, and feel good each day when I wake up. And so I don't have any books on nutrition. Regarding favorite books on cooking, I don't have specific titles that come to mind. I've got hundreds of books on food. Many of them are cookbooks. Others talk about food culture. Others talk about food manufacturing. But I'm sorry, I don't have favorite titles to share. All right. Thank you. All right. Next up. Love to leave this course with oil-free salad dressings that are not sweet ideas. In our library of recipes and also in our courses, we introduce some, oil-free as an added oil, right? Oil-free, processed oil-free dressings that are based on, for example, balsamic vinegar that is sweetened with a fruit puree. And then it might have the addition of some herbs and spices to round out the flavor profile according to your preferences. We have a dressing or a foundation, for example, that's based on an avocado puree. And then to that, we might thin that out with a plant-based milk. And then we're adding herbs and spices to round out the flavor profile. And we can take that in different directions, right, to suit the style of meal, right, the flavor profile, the regional cuisine profile that you want to match. So those are a couple of ideas. And, you can make dressings that are based on tofu, where we blend that. We might thin it down, whether it's with water or with plant-based milk. And then we're adding a sweetener if you want. Again, not to make it sweet, but to bring some balance to the dressing. And so that's, what I always have in mind when I mention the word sweetener. It's not necessarily to make something sweet in a prominent profile, but to balance the other tastes that are present, whether it's astringency or sourness or bitterness or something else. Okay, so those are a couple of approaches, and you might play with some of those formulas. Thank you. All right, next up. What would be better for new kitchen gas, gas top or induction, and why? I cook mostly on gas. I have an induction burner that I use for catering that I use just occasionally. I've used induction occasionally in the past. I can go either way. So maybe I'm not the one to ask. I'm not picky when it comes to cook surfaces. I'll use electricity. I'll use gas. I'll use wood, induction. Just give me a little bit of time to adjust to that technology, and I'll be able to move forward. And so I think you might talk to some other folks for some more subjective as well as objective feedback, and see what might fit your situation. All right, thank you. All right, next up from Michael. If we use a Whetstone for this course, do you have a brand or size recommendation? It sounds like the steel option is sufficient for frequent knife maintenance. If so, is a Whetstone necessary for this course? So let me address this from the lower hanging fruit here, and that is the steel question. Yes, a steel is typically used for daily maintenance of your knife. Again, just typically once a day is probably fine for most home cooks. Again, depending on the volume of your food prep, as well as the things that you're cutting, and even the hardness of your cutting board, right, makes a difference here. There are different steels to consider. The typical steel is round in cross section. They have some light ribbing on the surface, some texturing on the surface. Those are quite fine. There are also steels that are sort of almond shaped in cross section, and they have some diamond dust adhered to the surface. Those also work very well. I like those. There are ceramic steels, and those work very well. So, again, I like to just focus on cooking and not get too caught up in the technology. I'm fluid in that way. So a steel, whatever you have, is probably fine. It's just a matter of you learning how to use it. When it comes to the next step of knife maintenance, at some point, your knife will need sharpening. And so that's when we have the choice of sending it out to somebody for sharpening, or we do it ourselves. And if we do it ourselves, we have basically the choice of using some sort of a simple handheld sharpener where we draw the blade through some grooves that offer different coarseness and therefore different stages of sharpening for the blade. Or we might apply the blade to a whetstone. There are also folks out there that use a spinning wheel, right, to sharpen knives. And whatever you choose, some practice will be necessary. And the easiest technology to use would be the handheld sharpeners, where you draw the knife through multiple grooves in order to make adjustments to the blade. A whetstone has a learning curve. And, as you, if you want to adopt a whetstone, always practice on a knife that is a little more expendable, a practice knife, before you move on to your custom knives or more expensive knives, because you can do some damage otherwise. So do keep that in mind. In terms of size, I have stones that are probably this big. So what's that mean? About 10 inches long, maybe 12 inches long by, maybe 2.5 inches or so, maybe 3 inches at the bigger dimension. Coarseness varies quite a bit as well, and people will recommend different coarsenesses. But you might have something like an 800 on the coarse side. You can work with, say, a 1200 to a 1500. Some people also like to have a finer stone closer to 2000 or even a 5000. Some people want even a finer stone for polishing the edge, the cutting edge to a very, very smooth finish, which gives you more longevity for the cutting edge. So, take a look at, some of the deeper opinions online. I recommend that you go to Serious Eats, right? The website or a blog called Serious Eats, in addition to any Ruby course information. And then just create a larger picture of understanding and understanding what the options are around whetstones. All right. And otherwise, your last question, is it necessary for this course? I don't think a whetstone specifically is necessary, but again, at some point you'll need to sharpen your knives. And for a home cook, that might be once a year, give or take a little bit, depending on how you care for your knives and how much prep you do. And so be prepared either to find somebody outside that can sharpen them for you, or to adopt some sort of technology at home to maintain your knives yourself. All right, thank you. All right, next up, my fried rice always ends up like just regular rice with some mix-ins, but no crispy fried aspect. What suggestions do you have to get fried rice? So this is an interesting question. So, first of all, fried rice, once upon a time, was probably a utilization dish, right? So in other words, we had some fried rice left over from yesterday. How do we use it today? It's gotten a little bit dry, a little bit firm. Let's bring some interest to it, introduce some moisture to it again. By adding vegetables and maybe a little bit of oil and herbs and other things. And let's create a fresh dish, right? So that's kind of where fried rice most likely came from. Now, another thing to keep in mind is if we're used to having fried rice at a Chinese restaurant, keep in mind that the technology is probably different. The cooking technology is probably different in a Chinese restaurant kitchen than it is in your home. in that some burners with very, very high BTUs are being used, which allows for these nuanced flavors and textures to develop against that superheated metal of a wok. Okay, and it's often difficult to accurately replicate those details at home. All right, so keep in mind that some compromise will need to be made. But with that in mind, if you're looking at, if you're thinking about some of these crispy fried aspects, right, these edges, then basically we're talking about a very hot pan and some very hot oil that will start to transform the edges of the rice. And it might not be visually apparent, but the chemical change and structural change that's taking place will give us different aromas and different, just different experience on the palate. And so that's, going to be, I think, the first thing for you to try, right, is to have a very hot pan and have some high temp oil, a refined oil that can take some high heat, and then experiment with the fried rice that you're making. Now at home, because our stovetops have a lower BTU rating in most cases, in other words, they put out less heat, we need to cook with a smaller amount of food in the pan because a large amount of food is going to cool down the pan, and the burner will not be able to bring that temperature up quickly, okay, to give us, I think, the effects that you're looking for in the fried rice, okay? So you might want to cook in batches, in smaller batches, 2 or 3 batches, for example, to try to best mimic those results that I think you have in mind. All right, thank you. All right, Robert says, this might be a silly question, but any recommendation regarding resealable containers for veggie stock I've created? Thinking some are probably better than others. Thanks as always. You bet. There are folks out there that will use exclusively glass containers. Okay, so I mean, if you fall into that category, your choices are fewer. Okay, then it's going to be a subset of what's out there. So to take a look at the appropriate stores, and they're going to be consumer focused kitchen stores like Sur La Table or Williams Sonoma, for example. Maybe Costco, might have these from time to time. But if you're open to using plastic containers, then what you'll find used in restaurants, for example, are what are referred to as deli containers. And if you find local restaurant supply store, or you can look online, you'll find these deli containers, and they come in different sizes. I use quart size and also pint size containers, and they're resealable. I use them until they break. They go in the freezer, in the fridge. You can store dry goods in them, and so they're pretty handy. But that's my recommendation. Thank you. All right. Next up, can I store sliced sweet potatoes raw in the fridge to use later in the week, or does it need to store in water? Different sweet potatoes have different personalities, and some of them will darken pretty quickly, and others stay more stable. So I don't know. Give it a try. In other words, the particular potatoes that you have, right? Give it a try and see what the results are. And if it's better to mitigate some of the enzymatic browning, then put it in water, and you might even try acidulated water. So water that has a little squeeze of lemon juice or lime juice, for example, or a little shot of vinegar if you prefer. and see how that changes the results for you. All right, thank you. All right, next question. Can you recommend a homemade replacement for the turkey that meat eaters would be satisfied with at Thanksgiving? Aha, so we're getting into some of these holiday questions. I love it. My approach to these holiday meals, where traditionally we would expect a gros pièce or a focus point in the way of a big hunk of meat, is remove that big hunk of meat and don't worry about it. If you want to replace it with something, then think of something that would go into a big bowl, right? So that becomes the focal point of the table. So it could be a casserole of some sort, otherwise, just load up the table with a bunch of beautiful plant-based dishes, if that's what the end game is. Don't apologize for it. Make good food, and everyone will enjoy it. Which means that we need to incorporate different cooking methods. Okay, as we incorporate dry heat methods such as grilling and sauteing and roasting, that caramelization, that browning that we introduce to the food provides deeper flavors, broader flavors, longer finishes, more umami, and more satisfaction very often. Think about herbs and spices, right? To bring in more intense flavors, different flavors. Think about citrus juice and zest that you might add to salads, and fresh herbs in salads to, again, bring aroma, right, which translates to flavor, which translates to enjoyment, right, of a given dish. That's, I think, in a nutshell, what I have to say. That's certainly my approach. And I get comments every year from extended family members about this or that and how things are different. But, they forget about the absence of meat within those first 2 or 3 bites of the food. And that's your goal. All right. Thank you. All right. Good day, Devin. I have enjoyed the course. I have learned so much. I'm going into catering. Do you know of a software that help in scaling up a recipe? No. I haven't used such software in a long time, and so I don't have anything off the top of my head. You might take a look at Chef Tech, however. That's a brand name that comes to mind. And Chef Tech is set up to do this sort of thing in addition to costing. And but again, I haven't used that in years, so I don't have any details to share. Okay. Thank you very much, and best of luck to you. All right. Hello. I read somewhere that some chefs never do wet brining, but only dry ones, because the wet brining reduces the flavors from the meat by replacing meat's natural juices with tap water. What's your suggestion? Aha. Gosh, I think it goes both ways. I think, first of all, I'll preface this sort of a topic by saying that when people are, especially working with meat, it seems, they become really opinionated. And when it comes to, prepping meat in different ways, people have very strong opinions on what's best. So my first thing to share would be, give it a try this way and that way, and see what you like. You might find, some results work best wet. Others work better with a dry brine. I've certainly used both. I haven't done side-by-side comparisons with a given cut of product. So I really don't have specific feedback, regarding, what might be better and why. I use them both today from time to time. But again, if you want some specifics that would apply to your setting, I always recommend experimenting and see which results you like best. Again, based upon your conditions, right? Your storage space, your cooking, technology that you're using, and the desired outcome for your given event or application. All right, thank you. All right. Next up from Gary, the Ornish. This would be Dean Ornish, Dr. Dean Ornish. Plant-based diet avoids using avocado and coconut due to the high oil content. Many recipes from FOK use these ingredients since there are not many viable substitutes. Why are these ingredients used frequently? Gary, my quick answer is very simply that these are just different approaches to cooking and eating. The Ornish approach to food prep and eating is to limit dietary fat to 10%. And that's restrictive for some people. Some people would consider that to be pretty low. Certainly it's effective, right? For all of those things that the Dr. Dean Ornish diet wants to do in terms of mitigating or neutralizing or even reversing, heart disease and type 2 diabetes, for example. But just again, basically, it's a different approach. And so in terms of substitutions, I mean, there are substitutions. It just depends on how the ingredient is used in the given recipe. It depends on the function, right, of that ingredient. And so, in other words, sometimes, avocado is used to provide body and certainly fat, right? Fat is mouthfeel. It's that sense of satisfaction on the palate. But if it's the body, then we can use a bean puree. Sometimes it's tofu, depending on the application. Coconut oil is certainly used for its, again, fatty qualities that give a certain sense of satisfaction on the palate. But also functionally, right, when coconut oil is chilled, it sets up hard. And so it can be used to lend structure to certain desserts, for example. Okay. And so if we pull that out, then we need to make compromises, right? We might be satisfied with a slightly softer texture that might result from other nut purees, but maybe in smaller quantities to meet your lower fat threshold. But compromises would definitely be necessary. Okay. So yeah, here I think as is so often the case, modifications to recipes will be necessary. And this is true for a lot of people, right? If you have food allergies, then you need to make modifications. If you have simply a dislike of food, right? Or some other reason, maybe it's a religious prescription, right, that prohibits you from consuming certain foods, then substitutions will need to be found. So experimentation will be necessary. So similarly, if we want to omit avocado or coconut from a given preparation, we first need to understand the function of those ingredients in the recipe. And then step 2 is to find the ingredient, or often multiple ingredients, that will serve as a substitute. Okay, so be open to experimentation and take notes along the way. All right, thank you. All right, next up from Michael. Do you have a recommendation for a specific brand of dehydrator that we can use for this course and beyond? There are a couple of popular brands out there, and one of them is Excalibur. I think the most important thing probably is to find a dehydrator that is going to circulate air evenly, right, throughout the chamber and between all the layers, or the trays that you use, so that the product can dry as evenly as possible. Okay, there may still be some shifting, right, of trays periodically that will be necessary in order to achieve even results. Now, in order to do that, some of these companies will have a fan that's mounted in the back, so that the fan can blow across each of the trays evenly, whereas some designs have a fan coming up from the bottom, in which case the bottom trays get more air contact and they dry faster than the top trays. So there might be some other designs that allow air to move up the center column and then circulate through more evenly. But take a look at, I'd say, consumer reviews as well as other professional reviews online to figure out which ones function the best with respect to even air circulation. Okay, thank you. All right, next up. I mostly cook and eat plant-based, and I really like what I've learned about no oil sauteing vegetables. Do the same directions for heating the pan apply to pan frying meats with no oil? The quick answer is yes. The same principle does apply. You can use the mercury ball test, right, in terms of heating up the pan, or with experience, right, you'll be able to feel the heat coming off of the pan and know that you're in that range to then proceed with adding food to the pan and cooking. But the quick answer is yes. Those principles do apply to meat cookery. When it comes, to the world of non-plant-based foods, do keep in mind that temperature is probably too hot for a lot of seafood. There may be exceptions. It's probably too hot for a delicate fried egg, for example. So there are going to be exceptions out there. Okay, but give it a try. Thank you. Okay, now I tried making hibiscus agar jellies from a strong hibiscus agua fresca. My first attempt failed. The second time around, I diluted the tea with water and doubled the agar. It still did not set. Is the hibiscus just too acidic? That's my first guess. Okay, and if Fran is still on the show today, maybe she's got some guidance she can share with us. But that would be my first expectation. Okay, and I haven't made an agar jelly from hibiscus, so I don't have anything else more specific to share with you. If you'd like some further feedback on that, feel free to send in your query to support@ruby.com, and we'll direct that to Fran and see what her thoughts are. Thank you. All right, next up, what's the process for making ghee? And is there a guideline for the base for the ghee? Okay, so ghee fundamentally is clarified butter. Okay, at its simplest, that's the equivalent. And clarified butter means that you take whole butter and you remove the water and you remove the milk solids. Okay, so Whole butter is approximately 80% fat and about 15% water and about 5% milk solids. And so we're removing those other two items, which results in 100% butter fat. And that is basically ghee. Okay. Now, there are some variations on ghee, right? Where during the preparation, okay, and you're asking for the process, let me share that now. You take whole butter, put it in a pan, and then we melt that butter and then continue to let it simmer so that we boil out, we evaporate the water, okay? And then once the water is evaporated, what's left is going to be the milk solids. And, at that point, you can turn off the heat, and then you can decant the fat, capturing 100% butter fat, right, or ghee at that point. Some folks will leave the pot on the fire for a little bit longer in order to begin to brown the milk solids to add some deeper flavor notes to the ghee. Some people will add spices like bay leaf. Is that a spice or an herb? I don't know. I'll let you figure that out. But you can add bay leaf or other spices to the ghee to add some flavor layers, some flavor notes. And again, those are optional, okay? But those are things that some people do. Patrick has also put up a link, all right, to one of our technique tips called "What is Ghee?" And so you might take a look at that as well. Okay, but hopefully this quick overview will help you along the way to produce your own ghee at home. Have fun with it. The nice thing with ghee is you get the flavor of butter as you're cooking, but you also have a higher smoke point because otherwise with whole butter, the milk solids will burn relatively quickly, okay? And if you are dabbling in Ayurvedic cooking, then ghee is going to be a must in your kitchen. All right, thank you. All right, next up, I have tried all the suggestions for a pie crust that will not shrink or distort. I have tried resting, freezing, different shortenings, baking a crust on the bottom of the plate, but I always come up with a shrunken crust that looks bad. Any suggestions? One technique here, is to allow that crust to hang over the edge of the pie pan a little bit, so that as it does shrink, it will start to shrink in toward the size of the pan. I realize that's a very simplistic approach, but that is one technique that you might try. There's always a chance to blind bake the crust, right? In which case, we're lining it, with parchment paper, and then putting in some beads, appropriate beads, or sometimes they're beans, in order to weight down that crust as it bakes. So that's one way to do that. Keeps it nice and smooth as well, depending on what type of a pie you might be producing. Depending on, in my experience with smaller size crusts, I have also put on top of that, this is a different way of blind baking, but inserting another pan. That's probably more to keep it flat, right, than shrinkage, however. But it probably does affect the shrinkage to some extent, okay? But give that a try. Cut that dough just a little bit larger so that as it does shrink, it'll draw in toward the size of your pan. Okay, thank you. All right, next up from Janice. Do you have any idea what Beyond or Impossible meat is made of? I'm not really a fan of seitan meat. No, not exactly. I mean, I've seen the list, and it's got a bunch of stuff in it. I don't have that list in front of me, nor do I remember the details. But yeah, take a look at that, to see if the extent of that ingredient list is going to suit your food philosophy. All right, thank you. All right, next up from Jesse. In the future, I would like to start a food truck business. Do you have any advice about how to start one? This is a big question, and it's really about business startup. And I recommend a couple of things. In one of our archived live events, we have a talk on costing ingredients and costing recipes. In other words, calculating the food cost of the dishes on your menu, which is very important to do. The other thing that I always mention in these cases is to consider putting together a business plan that will guide you through this process of taking your concept, closer to reality by having you address a series of questions around your audience and marketing and pricing and food quality and food costing and just to figure out if your idea, your concept is a viable one that could be profitable or not, based upon all these other factors that go into creating a business. All right, so a business plan, in my opinion, is very important. All right. Now, beyond that, my immediate question or feedback would be to take a look at the myriad of online resources, okay? And then also consider in another resource, both on ground and online, called SCORE, SCORE.org. And SCORE is an organization. They are part of the U.S. government's Small Business Administration, and SCORE is comprised of business professionals, many of whom are retired. Some are still active, but they have expertise in all different types of businesses, including food. And you can, align yourself with one of these folks as a mentor to guide you, and I think it's a great resource to use. So consider SCORE as well. All right, and it looks like Patrick has posted the link to our archived live event on ingredient and recipe costing. Please take a look at that. Let's see here. Let me take a look at Fran's response. Thank you very much, Fran, on the hibiscus agar question of a few minutes ago. Agar powder should gel hibiscus, okay? So always test a small portion of the liquid gel. Add more agar as needed, and send in a question as necessary. And Fran is happy to follow up. Thank you, Fran. All right, next up from Rodney. What are some ways to incorporate oats into a whole food plant-based meal or snack? I discovered the peanut butter granola bars in the FOK recipe site, and those are great, but would like variety and can't stand oatmeal. Okay, how funny. So I was going to suggest a cookie recipe, and it's one that I go to. In fact, I have some downstairs in the pantry right now, and I just took a baseline oatmeal cookie out of a Better Homes and Gardens new cookbook from probably 1982, and I bumped up the oats. I bumped up spices, and just made sure that it adhered as a cookie. I pulled out the eggs, and I use flax gel. You can certainly use chia, right, as we've discussed today. And then I created something that I thought was pretty tasty. I'm not tasting the oats so much as I am all the spices that I use. And, I definitely recommend playing with spices in this sort of a context, especially with something, like a grain, right? Like oats. That can be bland. Sometimes they have a distinctive flavor that might be picked up by some consumers. And you can really mask those elements while drawing out some more interesting and enjoyable elements through spices. So that's going to be one thing to consider. Otherwise, what I will do from time to time is make a savory oatmeal. And this is breakfast for us here at home. And rather than loading it up with brown sugar and, that sort of I'll say, commonly seen oatmeal style, I'll introduce vegetables, carrots and onion and celery, right? Maybe starting with mirepoix. And then herbs, right? I like cilantro to finish, spices, cloves, cardamom, ground up in the mortar, and then added during the cooking process. And then I finish up with a squeeze of lime juice. And that's a really easy way to produce a dish that I think is pretty good for you. It's got a lot of fiber, right? Nature's broom. You got to have that in your diet, right? One of my favorite F words. And it's a great way to sort of cover up the flavor of oatmeal because you have a lot of spices and other ingredients in there, all right? Oats can always be added to soups and stews. And I would just start out in small quantities, right? Where, instead of like a barley soup, you just use oats instead. Or you can, add oats to a smoothie, which I do from time to time. Cooked oats, and I'll, add a dollop to a blender bowl of smoothies, continue to blend that up. Just adjust the quantity based upon the viscosity or the thickness that you like. Otherwise, it'll turn into a pudding-like consistency pretty quickly. All right, so those are a few ideas that you might try, and you're bound to discover some things that you like along the way. Thank you. All right, next up, I've been making sourdough bread, something new to add to my knowledge. Can you suggest some plant-based toppings besides hummus? I made some chia jam, which was jamming good. Excellent. Pun intended, I'm sure, right? But I would like to have something to serve with dinner. So what I'm reading here, Allison, is perhaps a desire to, right, make a more substantial sort of a toast, right? I would consider anything in the realm of pizza toppings, right, to be fun. What comes to mind for me are, first of all, from Mexican cuisine, is the idea of an enchilada, right, which is something that's enrobed in a chili sauce, or an enfrijolada, something that is covered or enrobed in a loose bean puree, like a refried beans or a bean puree. And those can be combined, right, with so many other items, ingredients, whether it's herbs or sauteed caramelized shallots to create something more substantial. Let's see here. In terms of other toppings, at the table, take a look at online at the Scandinavian tradition of these open-faced sandwiches. which some of which are absolutely beautiful and delicious, and a lot of fun as well. They might incorporate slices of avocado or pickled onion, or other pickles, right? Other vegetables, cooked or raw. They're really nice ways, I think, to top your beautiful sourdough bread. All right. Thank you. All right. Next up. And let's see. This is a message from Anne regarding induction. Okay, induction burners. I love mine. I was sad I couldn't have gas where I lived at first, but now thankful. Cleans up great. It's super responsive, turning up or down. It can boil water very fast. I do not shake my pans on it, and had to practice my flip. Oh yeah, okay, I get that. So you don't scratch or perhaps damage that glass surface. So yeah, there you go. Some great feedback. Thank you very much, Anne, for sharing that. I appreciate it. And I think it was Andre, right, earlier that asked that question. So hopefully that's helpful for you. All right, next up from Mark. I have read several opinions on smoothies, some good, some bad. As far as nutrient value once blended, as opposed to whole fruit before blending. Example, maybe banana, strawberry, or the like, say with unsweetened almond milk, drink or eat. In most cases, I'm eating it. I'm an interactive sort of a person. I love the sensuality of eating, and probably why I eat a lot of food. I just like the chewing and all that stuff that goes on. But there's certainly times when I'll drop some things into the blender and give it a spin before drinking it. In terms of opinions, I'll leave that to the consumer. I think the downside that's cited, right, is that blended foods can be absorbed by your body quicker, right, than whole foods. And that's not always a good thing. And if we put juicing and juices on that spectrum, then juices are probably absorbed even faster because they lack the fiber that's still present in a smoothie. Okay. So do take that into consideration. But the other sort of discussion point out there is that a smoothie, I guess, ideally, right, would replace a meal rather than become in addition to a meal, right? They're very easy to consume, and so sometimes they become in addition to the day's calorie intake, and therefore can add to your overall intake and lead to excess body fat, for example. But if they're used as a replacement, yeah, maybe not so bad. All right. But have some fun with it. Thank you. All right. Next up, I only have a food processor currently, and I'm thinking about purchasing a Vitamix. Does it matter whether the container is tall or wide as far as the blending smoothness goes? I'm looking mostly at the smaller E310 48 fluid ounce model. Okay, thanks for the specifications. I think, the biggest difference is between the tall bowl and the shorter bowl is whether or not it'll fit underneath your cupboards after you finish using it. And that was a long time criticism of the Vitamix. And the new one, fits snugly underneath the typical cupboard these days, much like a Blend Tech or other blenders do. Now, in terms of performance, overall, take a look at the wattage of the motor, and try to find something that is large or as high as you can get it. Something in the neighborhood of, say, 1400 or 1500 watts to give you power to move through most anything that you would encounter in the kitchen. Now, I don't have familiarity with the specific E310 model, so you might take a look at some online reviews, professional reviews, as well as consumer reviews to look at the feedback. All right, thank you. All right, excuse me a moment. All right, next up from Laura. Started with FOK, just completed Plant-Based Pro, and today began Essential Vegan Desserts. Hi, Franch, says Laura. Thank you very much. Wow, that's a great path you've taken. Thank you for the great year, Eric. Well, you're welcome. I mean, I recognize you from the courses, and you've done some wonderful work. I know many complain about 2020, but Ruby made mine amazing. Thank you very much. We've had a lot of folks that have taken to Ruby during this time when they're at home, and you are not alone, Laura. But again, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts here. I appreciate it. All right, next up, John Kohler has a YouTube channel that has some great reviews on how to use different dehydrators. All right, thank you, Cindy. This is a follow-up to the earlier question on dehydrator selection. And so nice to have a source for some reviews. Thank you for sharing. Next up, what is the best way to make dashi? Do you get more flavor from soaking the kombu overnight or using a quicker heat method? I think the primary difference there is, sort of one of gentleness in the flavor. Clearly the cold soak is going to be a little bit more gentle. I mean, as we know, heat is much more harsh and oftentimes damaging of foods. And heat also changes, right, foods chemically. It's certainly more likely to than a cold water soak would be. Here too, I would suggest that you do a side-by-side comparison in terms of any flavor difference that you might be interested in. The word best, right? These sort of absolute terms, I usually don't use with food and cooking because it really depends on the individual situation. And I make miso soup every morning for breakfast, and I shave my own katsuo, and introduce the miso, and I sometimes use kombu as a supplement or complement to the katsuo when I make the dashi. Other times I just add wakame or a different type of sea grass to bring in those elements of flavor, aroma, and nutrition. And as I make the soup. And so there are a lot of different ways that you can go about this, but for your specific situation and your desired outcome, I recommend doing an experiment between the hot method and cold method of flavor extraction for the kombu. All right, thank you. All right, Christine says Beyond Beef has pea protein, rice protein, mung bean protein, potato juice, etc., etc., etc. All right, thanks again for the follow-up here on the earlier question. I think it was from Janice, if I remember correctly, on some of these Impossible Burger and Beyond Beef options on the market today. All right, thank you very much. And next up from Rashi. Thank you for all your guidance so far. I recently bought a wok, and the manufacturer requires that I season it prior to use. How would I go about doing so? A common way to season a wok is, first of all, to give it a good scrub with a coarse scrubby. to on both the inside and the outside to remove any protective coating that has been applied to it. And that's very often the case. And then as far as the seasoning process with heat is concerned, introduce ginger and garlic chives and cook that on high heat. We might do that multiple times, rubbing that product all the way around and through. Use some oil in there as well, okay? And you might do this process more than once to sort of remove some of the metallic flavor, neutralize some of that, as we also introduce some of the protection from the oil. Keep in mind that it might be necessary, right, to do this sort of thing once in a while, right, as needed, especially if your wok happens to have had a good scrubbing for some reason or another, okay? But give that a try. All right, thank you. Okay, and next up, looks like the last question. This is from Susan. Any chance I can save a green pan that a spatula melted on the surface? Wow, I'm not sure. I've never had this experience before. Try to scrape off, any melted, whatever the substance might be, right? Plastic or rubber of some sort. And try to do so delicately so that you avoid scratching into the pan's surface. And then, I think there's probably a good chance, right? You can find some way to reuse that pan or extend the life on that pan. But do give it a try first, all right? Thank you very much. And that brings us to the conclusion of my office hours today. And I want to thank all of you for joining me and for joining Ruby today, and for making today's program what it is. All right, your participation is so important. Now, until we meet next time, right? If you have any questions regarding your food and cooking, please give a shout. Reach out to us at support@ruby.com, and that question will be routed to whoever is going to be best suited to answering it. Could be me, could be Fran, could be somebody else. And until we meet again, I wish you all the best and enjoy cooking. Thank you. Bye-bye.